While I was sitting across from our marriage counselor watching my wife talk about building trust, my phone buzzed with an urgent message from our financial advisor. "Mike, we need to talk. There's been unusual activity in your joint accounts." That's how I discovered that Rebecca, my wife of 12 years, had transferred over $340,000 of our savings to her brother during the 3 months we'd been in marriage counseling. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Michael Taylor. I'm 42 years old and work as a portfolio manager at Evergreen Capital in Portland, Oregon. I've spent the last 15 years building my career and a comfortable life with my wife, Rebecca. We met at a charity fundraiser when we were both starting our careers. She in marketing, me in finance. Her ambition matched mine, and within a year we were married, dreaming about our future in our small apartment in southeast Portland. Fast forward to last spring. We'd moved up to a beautiful craftsman home in Lake Oswego, had healthy retirement accounts, and owned a vacation property in Cannon Beach that we'd visit on weekends. From the outside, everything looked perfect. The reality was different. Rebecca and I had been growing apart for years. Our conversations had become transactional: bills, schedules, property maintenance. The emotional connection we once had seemed to have evaporated sometime between her last promotion and my extended business trip to New York. After a particularly cold weekend where we barely spoke, I suggested marriage counseling. To my surprise, Rebecca agreed immediately. I remember feeling hopeful. Maybe she wanted to fix things too. We found Dr. Thomas Gardner, a well-regarded marriage counselor with an office overlooking the Willamette River. His mahogany-paneled office became our weekly battlefield for honesty, or so I thought. Communication and transparency are the foundation of rebuilding trust, Dr. Gardner would say, looking over his wire-rimmed glasses as Rebecca nodded earnestly. We'd been in counseling for about 3 months, and I genuinely believed we were making progress. Rebecca seemed more engaged, asking about my day, suggesting dinner dates. There was a warmth returning between us that I hadn't felt in years. That Tuesday in April, during our session, she even reached over and took my hand as she talked about wanting to build a stronger future together. That's when my phone buzzed. I normally would have ignored it, but I was on call for a major client, so I glanced down discreetly. The message from Sarah Johnson, our financial advisor of 8 years, made my blood run cold. "Mike, we need to talk. There's been unusual activity in your joint accounts." I excused myself after the session, telling Rebecca I had a work emergency. Sitting in my car in the parking garage, I called Sarah immediately. "Mike, I've been trying to reach you." "For a couple of days?" Sarah said, her voice tense. "There have been several large transfers from your joint investment accounts to an external account I don't recognize." "What transfers?" I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. "I haven't made any transfers." "They were authorized by Rebecca," Sarah explained. "Started small about 3 months ago, but the amounts have been increasing. The last one was $80,000 2 days ago." I sat in stunned silence as Sarah detailed the transactions. Over the past 3 months, coinciding exactly with our counseling, Rebecca had transferred a total of $340,000 to an account under the name of Wilson Enterprises. Daniel Wilson, her brother. Dan had always been the black sheep of Rebecca's family, constantly jumping between business ventures, always needing just a little help to get his latest idea off the ground. Rebecca had lent him money before, small amounts that we'd agreed upon together, but this was different. This was calculated, hidden, and massive. "The reason I'm calling now is that I received paperwork to transfer your Cannon Beach property into a trust," Sarah continued. "It seemed unusual, especially when I noticed Daniel Wilson was listed as the trust administrator." I thanked Sarah, promising to address the situation, and then sat in my car for nearly an hour, trying to process what was happening. The woman I'd just watched talk about trust and building our future had been systematically transferring our assets to her brother. Behind my back, that night I said nothing to Rebecca. I watched her move around our kitchen, talking about her day, planning a weekend getaway to our beach house, the very property she was trying to transfer away. I smiled and nodded, my mind racing through years of memories, looking for signs I might have missed. The next morning, I called Jennifer Martinez, an attorney a colleague had recommended for a client. Her office was in a converted Victorian house in Portland's Pearl District, filled with modern art and the scent of fresh coffee. I laid out everything I knew, pushing the statements Sarah had forwarded across the polished desk. "This is methodical," Jennifer said, studying the pattern of transfers. "The timing with your counseling sessions isn't coincidental. Has anything else changed in the past 3 months?" That's when I realized that Rebecca had suggested updating our wills just weeks after we started counseling. She'd presented it as estate planning, something responsible couples do. I'd signed the papers she'd prepared without much review, trusting her, as I always had. "I need to see those documents," Jennifer said firmly, "and we need to act quickly to freeze the remaining assets." That afternoon, while Rebecca was at work, I went into her home office. We'd always respected each other's private spaces, but those boundaries seemed meaningless now. In her desk drawer, beneath a stack of magazines, I found a leather portfolio I didn't recognize. Inside were copies of our new wills, power of attorney documents I didn't remember signing, and a draft trust document for our Cannon Beach property with Daniel listed as trustee. But there was something else. A handwritten timeline on Rebecca's personal stationery. It detailed phases of what she called the exit plan, with dates and dollar amounts next to each step. The final phase was scheduled for next month. Complete transfer of CB property, establish Seattle residency, file. Rebecca was planning to leave, not just me, but the state. She and Dan had systematically been moving our assets out of my reach. The marriage counseling wasn't about saving our relationship. It was a smokescreen to keep me complacent while she executed her plan. I photographed everything, feeling like a spy in my own home, then carefully returned the portfolio exactly as I'd found it. That night, I again acted as if nothing had changed. Rebecca suggested we open a bottle of wine, and as we sat on our back deck overlooking the garden she'd spent years perfecting, she talked about renovations she wanted to make to the beach house. "I think we should make it more modern," she said, swirling her wine. "Open concept, bigger windows to see the ocean." I nodded, wondering if she felt any guilt discussing improvements to a property she was actively trying to steal. Did the Rebecca I married still exist somewhere behind those familiar brown eyes? Or had she always been capable of this level of deception? The next week was a careful dance. During the day, I worked with Jennifer to document everything and file emergency motions to freeze our assets. We discovered that the power of attorney document I supposedly signed gave Rebecca extraordinary control over our finances. A document Jennifer suspected might not hold up due to unusual witnessing protocols. Meanwhile, I maintained the facade. At home, we even attended another counseling session where Dr. Gardner praised our improved communication. The irony would have been laughable if it wasn't so painful. Sarah, our financial advisor, became an unexpected ally. As soon as I explained the situation, she began documenting every communication with Rebecca about the accounts. She also found records of previous transfers I hadn't known about, smaller amounts dating back almost a year, the groundwork for the larger scheme. "I should have noticed the pattern sooner," Sarah said apologetically during a discreet meeting at my office. "You noticed before it was too late," I assured her. "That's what matters." 10 days after Sarah's initial message, we were ready. Jennifer had prepared all the necessary legal documents, and a judge had granted a temporary freeze on our major assets pending a hearing. The freeze would take effect at midnight, and Jennifer advised me to have the conversation with Rebecca before she was served with papers. That evening, I suggested we have dinner at home. Rebecca seemed pleased, even stopping to buy flowers for the table. We ate the pasta she'd prepared, making small talk about work and neighbors. After she mentioned visiting Cannon Beach that weekend, I decided it was time. "I know about the transfers, Rebecca," I said quietly, setting down my fork. Her expression changed so slightly, most people wouldn't have noticed. Just a momentary tightening around her eyes before her face settled into confusion. "What transfers?" "The $340,000 you've moved to Dan's account over the past 3 months, I said, "and the attempt to transfer our beach house into a trust with him as trustee." Rebecca's confusion transformed into something harder. She set her wineglass down carefully. "You've been spying on me?" "Our financial advisor contacted me out of concern," I replied. "Should she not have noticed hundreds of thousands of dollars moving out of our accounts?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rebecca pushed back from the table. "Those are investments. Dan has a real estate opportunity that—" "Stop," I interrupted. "I found your exit plan, Rebecca. The timeline, the Seattle residency, all of it." A cold silence filled our dining room. The Rebecca I thought I knew vanished entirely, replaced by a stranger with calculating eyes. "You weren't supposed to find out until it was done," she finally said, her voice eerily calm. "This marriage has been over for years, Michael. I'm just making sure I get what I deserve." "By stealing from me while pretending to work on our marriage?" My voice cracked despite my efforts to stay composed. "Why the counseling? Why the act?" She shrugged, reaching for her wine. "I needed time to get everything in place, and I needed you distracted, feeling like we were working things out so you wouldn't pay attention to the finances." She took a sip. "It was actually Dan's idea. Brilliant, really. And Dr. Gardner, was he part of this too?" Rebecca actually laughed. "No, he's genuinely trying to help failing marriages. The poor man has no idea how I've been using those sessions." The coldness of her response stunned me. This calculated betrayal went beyond a failing marriage, or even greed. This was someone I truly didn't know. "There's a temporary freeze on all our assets effective midnight," I told her. "You'll be served with court papers tomorrow." Rebecca's composure finally cracked. "You can't do that. Dan has commitments with that money, deals in progress." "Illegal transfers made under false pretenses," I countered. "Your brother will need to explain to the court why he accepted funds he had to know weren't legitimately his." Rebecca grabbed her phone and walked out of the room. I could hear her in the hallway, urgently talking to someone, Dan, presumably, her voice rising with barely controlled panic. I sat alone at our dining table, surrounded by the trappings of the life we'd built. The hand-painted plates from our trip to Italy, the expensive wine she'd chosen to accompany her betrayal, the flowers she'd bought to set the stage for another evening of deception. 15 years reduced to assets on a balance sheet she was trying to control. When Rebecca returned, her panic had transformed into icy resolve. "My attorney will contact yours tomorrow. I'll be staying at a hotel tonight." "I think that's best." I agreed. She packed a bag efficiently like she'd rehearsed it. Perhaps she had. Before she left, she paused at the door. "You know, if you hadn't caught me in a few weeks, I would have suggested a trial separation. Very amicable. You would have thought it was your idea." A small, proud smile played on her lips. "I had it all planned out, right down to the restaurant, where I would cry just enough to make you feel guilty, but relieved." With that parting insight into the depth of her deception, she was gone. The following weeks were a blur of legal meetings. Financial forensics and emotional whiplash. Jennifer proved to be worth every penny as she methodically built our case. We discovered that Dan had already used some of the transferred money as down payments on properties in Seattle. Rebecca had signed a lease on an apartment there 3 months ago, exactly when she suggested marriage counseling. The most surreal moment came when Dr. Gardner called me, confused and concerned that Rebecca had cancelled all future appointments. I found myself in the awkward position of explaining to our marriage counselor that my wife had been using their sessions as cover for financial fraud. "I've been doing this for 27 years, he said, his voice heavy with disbelief. "I've never encountered anything like this." "That makes 2 of us," I replied. The court hearing came 6 weeks after that dinner. Rebecca arrived with an aggressive attorney from a prestigious downtown firm, her expression confident until Jennifer began presenting evidence. With each document, each timeline, each bank record, Rebecca's confidence visibly eroded. When Sarah testified about the pattern of transfers and her documentation of Rebecca's inconsistent explanations, Rebecca leaned over to whisper urgently to her attorney. Whatever strategy they'd planned was unraveling. The judge's ruling was comprehensive. All transfers were deemed fraudulent and had to be reversed with full accounting of any spent funds. The beach property remained solely in my name. The power of attorney was invalidated. Rebecca's attempt to use marriage counseling as a cover for financial fraud was specifically cited by the judge as evidence of extraordinary bad faith. Dan didn't appear at the hearing, but his lawyer did, attempting to argue that he was an innocent third party who believed the funds were legitimate gifts. That argument collapsed when Jennifer produced emails between Dan and Rebecca discussing the transfer timeline and keeping Mike distracted with references to counseling appointments. As we left the courthouse, Rebecca attempted to approach me, but Jennifer steered me toward the exit. "This isn't over," Rebecca called after me. "You have no idea what you've done." She was right about one thing. It wasn't over. The divorce. Proceedings took another 8 months, complicated by Rebecca's continued attempts to hide assets and her brother's reluctance to return funds he claimed were already invested. Eventually, facing contempt charges, Dan provided full accounting and began a structured repayment of the money he couldn't immediately return. Throughout this process, I learned that Rebecca had been planning her exit for nearly 2 years, methodically documenting our assets and researching ways to transfer them gradually. The marriage counseling was just the final phase, a particularly cruel touch that showed how thoroughly she had analyzed my likely reactions. She knew I would be so focused on saving our marriage that I wouldn't notice what was happening to our finances. 1 year after Sarah's message, the divorce was final. I kept our Lake Oswego house, though it felt too large and empty for just me. The beach property that Rebecca had tried so hard to obtain became my weekend sanctuary, a place to rebuild my sense of peace away from the betrayal that had infected our home. I ran into Dr. Gardner at a coffee shop downtown about 6 months after the divorce. He looked uncomfortable at first, but then asked if I wanted to join him. "I still think about your case often," he admitted. "It's made me question how I evaluate the couples I work with." "It's made me question everything," I told him honestly. "How do you trust again after something like this?" He considered my question carefully. "Trust isn't a static thing we achieve once and keep forever. It's a continuous choice we make, with appropriate verification along the way." He smiled slightly. "Perhaps that's the silver lining. You'll never again confuse trust with blind faith." I've thought about that conversation many times since. Trust with verification became my new philosophy, not just in relationships, but in all aspects of life. I established a more active role in managing my finances, meeting quarterly with Sarah to review everything in detail. I updated my will and created ironclad powers of attorney with multiple fail-safes. In a strange way, Rebecca's betrayal forced me to engage more fully with my life, rather than moving through it on autopilot, trusting that the foundations were solid without checking them. As for Rebecca, I heard through mutual friends that she eventually moved to Seattle as planned, though without the financial cushion she'd expected. Dan's business ventures apparently failed, taking what remained of the money with them. Sometimes I wonder if she regrets her elaborate scheme, or if she's simply plotting a new one with a different target. What haunts me most isn't the financial betrayal. Money can be recovered, accounts rebuilt. It's the realization that for months I sat across from her in that counseling office, vulnerably sharing my hopes for our future, while she was actively working to dismantle it. Each sincere word I spoke was met with calculated deception. Each moment I thought we were healing, she was checking items off her exit plan. I don't know if I'll ever marry again. Trust comes harder now, but perhaps with more wisdom attached to it. If I do, there will be prenuptial agreements and separate finances, not out of lack of faith, but out of respect for the lesson I learned at such high cost. Love and financial vigilance are not mutually exclusive. Sometimes, when I'm at the beach house watching the sunset over the Pacific, I feel grateful for Sarah's message that day. Without her attention to unusual patterns, Rebecca's plan might have succeeded. I might have found myself bewildered and betrayed with no recourse, believing I'd somehow failed at marriage rather than been methodically defrauded. If there's one thing I want people to take from my story, it's this: trust should be paired with appropriate awareness. Love doesn't require financial blindness, and sometimes the people closest to us are capable of the most elaborate deceptions, particularly when they know exactly what will distract us from seeing the truth. It's been 2 years now since that message lit up my phone in the counselor's office. I'm rebuilding, wiser and more cautious, but also more awake to the life around me. Rebecca took many things, but she gave me one invaluable gift. I will never again sleepwalk through my own life, trusting without verification, loving without awareness. That lesson was expensive, but its value may ultimately outweigh all that was lost. The morning after I received Sarah's message, I woke up early. Rebecca was still asleep, her breathing steady and peaceful, as if she didn't carry the weight of what she'd done. I slipped out of bed and went downstairs to make coffee, my mind racing with questions I wasn't ready to ask her yet. I needed more information before confronting Rebecca. Acting on impulse could jeopardize whatever chance I had of recovering our assets. So I did what I've always done in my professional life when facing uncertainty. I created a methodical plan to gather intelligence. My first step was to understand exactly what had happened to our finances. I drove to my office downtown earlier than usual, locked my door, and called Sarah Johnson. She agreed to meet me immediately, sensing the urgency in my voice. Sarah's office at Westridge Financial occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower, with views of Mount Hood on clear days. As the elevator climbed, I tried to compose myself, to approach this like any other financial problem I'd solved over the years. But this wasn't just any problem. This was my life, my future, my trust being systematically dismantled. "I've pulled everything I could find," Sarah said as I entered her office. She'd arranged documents across her conference table: account, statements, transfer authorizations, correspondence. The pattern is concerning. We spent 3 hours reviewing every transaction. What emerged wasn't random desperation, but a carefully orchestrated plan. The transfers had started 9 months earlier. Tiny amounts that would hardly raise eyebrows. 5,000 here, 8,000 there, always just below thresholds that would trigger additional verification protocols. "These first transfers went to your joint household account," Sarah explained, pointing to the statements, "but then they were moved again within 24 hours. "To where?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "To an account at Pacific Northwest Bank under the name Wilson Enterprises, she confirmed. Rebecca authorized all of these with her credentials. The system shows she logged in from your home IP address, usually during business hours. While I was at work, Rebecca had been systematically moving our money. But the timing of the larger transfers, coinciding perfectly with our counseling, suggested something more calculated. What raised your suspicion after all this time? I asked Sarah. She slid a document across the table. This came in yesterday. It's a request to transfer your Cannon Beach property into a revocable trust. The paperwork listed Rebecca as grantor, with her brother Daniel as trustee and primary beneficiary. You weren't mentioned anywhere. I stared at the document, my signature at the bottom, except it wasn't quite right. The loops were too perfect, the slant slightly off. I never signed this, I said. Sarah nodded grimly. I suspected as much. That's why I contacted you directly instead of processing it. By the time I left Sarah's office, we had documented transfers totaling nearly $340,000, almost a third of our liquid assets. The attempted property transfer would have added another $850,000 to that total. What had begun as a betrayal was revealing itself as something much worse, a methodical theft disguised as marital finance management. I needed legal advice, but I couldn't use our family attorney. Mark Stevens had handled our affairs for years, but he and Rebecca played tennis together monthly. I couldn't risk word getting back to her. I need someone discreet and aggressive, I told Greg Fernandez, a colleague who had recently gone through a difficult divorce. Jennifer Martinez, he replied without hesitation. She saved me when Caroline tried to hide assets through her sister. She doesn't play nice, but you don't want nice right now. Jennifer's office wasn't what I expected from a high-powered attorney. Instead of sleek downtown minimalism, her firm occupied a converted Victorian in the Pearl District. The waiting room featured comfortable antique chairs and local art instead of intimidating modern furniture. It felt more like a sophisticated friend's living room than a legal battleground. Jennifer herself projected the same disarming quality, petite with a warm smile that almost made you forget the sharp intelligence in her eyes. Almost. "Tell me everything," she said after her assistant had brought us coffee. "Start from the beginning." I laid out what I knew, the transfers, the counseling timeline, the forged property documents, while she took notes in a leather-bound journal. She asked precise questions that revealed her understanding of both financial fraud and marital psychology. "This isn't impulsive," she observed. "The graduated amounts, the timing with counseling, the attempted property transfer. Your wife has been planning this for some time." "But why?" I asked. If she wanted a divorce, she could have just asked. Oregon is an equitable distribution state. She'd get half anyway. Jennifer looked up from her notes. "But half isn't the same as controlling the distribution, is it? This way, she decides what assets go where, potentially securing more favorable items for herself while leaving you with less liquid holdings." She tapped her pen against her notepad. "The involvement of her brother suggests something more, though. Has Daniel had financial troubles recently?" The question triggered a memory. Christmas dinner 3 months ago, Rebecca's parents expressing concern about Dan's new business ventures. Something about leveraged real estate developments in Seattle. Rebecca had defended him passionately, unusual since she typically remained neutral in family disputes. "He might be," I acknowledged. "Rebecca hasn't shared details, but there have been hints of cash flow problems with his business." Jennifer nodded. "We need to investigate both Rebecca and Daniel. If they're colluding, the court will view this very differently than if she were simply hiding assets for herself." The legal strategy Jennifer outlined was comprehensive. Document everything, secure remaining assets immediately, investigate the brothers' finances, and prepare for both civil action and divorce proceedings. She recommended against immediate confrontation. "Right now, Rebecca doesn't know that you know," Jennifer explained. "That's a significant advantage. Once you reveal your awareness, she'll accelerate whatever plans remain and potentially destroy evidence." As I left Jennifer's office, she gave me a final piece of advice. "Start keeping a journal. Document every conversation, every unusual behavior, every financial discussion. Memory fades and distorts under stress. You'll need accurate records." That same afternoon, I opened a new individual bank account at a credit union where Rebecca and I had no history. Following Jennifer's advice, I transferred a portion of my most recent paycheck there, a completely legitimate move that wouldn't trigger suspicion but would give me financial independence if needed. The next phase of my information gathering required a delicate balance. I needed to investigate without raising Rebecca's suspicions. This meant maintaining our normal routine while secretly documenting everything. That evening at home, Rebecca suggested we review some investment options for our portfolio. The irony might have been amusing if it weren't so painful. "I've been thinking we should diversify more," she said casually, opening her laptop at the kitchen island. "Maybe look at some real estate investment trusts." I nodded, feigning interest while watching her facial expressions. Was there a flicker of something, guilt, concern, when she mentioned investments, or was I now seeing deception in every gesture? "Sounds interesting," I replied. "What kind of allocation were you thinking?" "Maybe 20% of our portfolio. It would give us exposure to commercial real estate without the headaches of direct ownership." I sipped my wine slowly. "That makes sense, though I've always been partial to tangible property, like our place in Cannon Beach." I watched carefully. Her eyes remained steady, her smile unchanged. "The beach house is perfect as it is," she said smoothly. "I'm talking about diversification through managed funds." Later, alone in my home office while Rebecca took a bath, I recorded this conversation in the journal Jennifer had recommended. Had Rebecca been testing me, checking whether I knew about the attempted property transfer? Or was this normal financial discussion between spouses? Everything now carried double meanings, shadows of potential deception. The next day, I decided to learn more about Daniel's business. LinkedIn revealed Wilson Enterprises was a real estate development and investment firm founded 3 years ago in Seattle. The company website showcased glossy renderings of mid-rise apartment buildings and retail spaces, with vague descriptions of upcoming projects, but no specific addresses or completion dates. I called a former client who had connections in Seattle. "Real estate. Wilson Enterprises. Let me ask around," Mark promised. He called back 2 hours later. "Nobody's heard much concrete. They've announced several projects, but broken ground on none. There's talk they've been trying to secure financing for a development near South Lake Union, but banks have been hesitant. The founder apparently has a complicated financial history." Complicated how? 2 bankruptcies before this venture. Some burned investors from a previous attempt at a restaurant group. Nothing criminal that I could find, but not the track record that attracts institutional investment. This information painted a clearer picture. Daniel needed capital for his real estate projects, capital that banks wouldn't provide because of his history. And suddenly, his sister was transferring hundreds of thousands of dollars his way, money that could serve as the down payment or proof of liquidity his business needed. I needed to understand how deep this connection went. Was Rebecca simply helping her brother, or was there more to their arrangement? I decided to check our home computer for any communications between them. This felt like a violation, searching through Rebecca's emails, but the alternative was continuing to be defrauded. I waited until she left for her Saturday yoga class, then sat down at our shared desktop in the home office. Rebecca and I had separate email accounts, but we'd always known each other's passwords, a transparency we'd maintained throughout our marriage. I hesitated before typing hers in, wondering if she'd changed it recently, given her other activities. She hadn't. Her inbox loaded immediately. I searched for Daniel and Dan, finding dozens of recent exchanges. Most seemed innocuous. Family. Updates, shared articles, birthday wishes, but a folder labeled Seattle Projects contained another story entirely. The earliest email was dated 18 months ago. Dan, I've been thinking about your situation. What if I could help with the capital you need? Mike and I have significant liquidity that's just sitting in conservative investments. The returns you're projecting would triple our growth rate. Let's discuss options when you're in Portland next month. R. The response came the same day. Becky, serious? That would solve everything. The Seattle market is still hot, and I have the perfect property identified. The only issue is convincing investors I have enough skin in the game. If you could help with that, the returns would be substantial. But would Mike agree? He's always been conservative with your portfolio. Rebecca's reply made my stomach clench. Leave Mike to me. He trusts me with the day-to-day financial management anyway. There are ways to structure this that won't require his direct approval for each step. Let's talk in person when you visit. No need for written plans. I continued reading through 18 months of correspondence, documenting key exchanges. The picture that emerged was devastating. What had begun as Rebecca helping her brother evolved into a comprehensive plan to extract as much capital as possible from our joint holdings. Money that Daniel desperately needed as his development plans faced increasing skepticism from legitimate investors. Most disturbing was an email from 3 months ago, just before our counseling began. Phase 2 is ready, legal documents prepared. Mike remains distracted with work and now believes our relationship needs attention. Perfect timing for the counseling suggestion. This gives us the 3-4 month window needed to complete the transfers and property reassignment. By the time we're discussing trial separation, everything will be secured. R. Daniel's response. Completed the picture. Seattle property closing date confirmed for July 15th. All capital needs to be in place by then. Once the project breaks ground, returns will start flowing back to you as planned. The separate account is ready for your portion. Property transfers look clean on paper. Your portion as family inheritance is perfectly justifiable post-separation. UDD. They had planned everything, using our marriage counseling as the distraction, timing the separation for after the property deal closed, creating a narrative that would justify Rebecca's sudden wealth as family money rather than marital assets. I copied key emails, taking screenshots as Jennifer had advised, careful not to disrupt anything in the account. I logged out, feeling physically ill. This wasn't just financial betrayal, it was the systematic dismantling of our entire relationship, planned over more than a year. That evening, Rebecca suggested we watch a movie together, cuddling close on the couch in a display of affection that now felt like performance art. I smiled and put my arm around her, hyper-aware of every gesture, every word. The woman beside me, whose heartbeat I could feel against my side, had been crafting an elaborate deception while planning our financial ruin. "You seem tense," she observed, looking up at me. "Still stressed about work?" "Just tired," I lied. "The Peterson account is demanding a lot of attention." She nodded sympathetically. "You work too hard. Maybe we should plan a weekend at the beach house soon. Get away from everything." The beach house she was actively trying to transfer away from me. I murmured agreement, wondering if she could feel my heart racing, if she could sense that I knew. The next morning, I called Jennifer to share what I'd discovered. She listened carefully, occasionally asking for clarification. "This changes our approach," she said finally. "This isn't just about the divorce asset division anymore. This is premeditated financial fraud involving a third party. We need to move faster than I initially thought. Jennifer outlined an accelerated plan, emergency motions to freeze assets, formal documentation requests for all accounts, potential involvement of forensic accountants. And we need to consider whether this rises to the level of criminal activity, she added. The systematic nature, the coordination between Rebecca and Daniel, the forged documents, this goes beyond typical divorce deception. The word criminal hung in the air. Despite everything, I struggled with the idea of Rebecca facing criminal charges. This was the woman I'd built a life with, whom I'd loved for 12 years. Even now, knowing what she'd done, part of me wanted to protect her. Let's focus on recovering the assets first, I said finally. I'm not ready to make decisions about criminal complaints. Fair enough, Jennifer agreed, but don't let your history cloud your judgment. From what you've shared, Rebecca isn't extending you the same considerations. Over the next week, I became a private investigator in my own marriage. I documented every unusual comment, every financial reference. I carefully photographed documents I found in Rebecca's desk, including handwritten notes about the Seattle property and a timeline of planned transfers that matched the email exchanges. Most valuably, I discovered a USB drive in her rarely used knitting basket that contained spreadsheets detailing every transfer, projected returns from Daniel's development, and what appeared to be a post-divorce budget based on assets that should have been divided between us. The level of calculation was breathtaking, every dollar accounted for, every contingency planned. But I also needed to understand Daniel's role more clearly. His financial desperation seemed to be driving much of this scheme. Through professional contacts, I discreetly arranged for a commercial real estate evaluation of the South Lake Union property his company had optioned. The report confirmed my suspicions. The property was significantly overvalued in Wilson Enterprises' projections, with development costs underestimated by nearly 40%. If Daniel proceeded with this development using our money, it would likely fail, taking our assets with it. This wasn't just theft, it was theft followed by probable financial suicide. I shared this information with Jennifer, who had been assembling a legal strategy. This strengthens our case considerably, she said. Your wife isn't just transferring assets, she's investing them in what appears to be a financially unsound venture. No judge will view that favorably in a divorce proceeding. 3 weeks after Sarah's initial message, we had compiled overwhelming evidence, transfer records, email exchanges, the forged property documents, Daniel's business records, the USB drive contents. Jennifer prepared emergency motions to freeze all our joint assets and prevent any further transfers. We're ready to file, she told me during our final planning meeting. Once these motions are granted, and with this evidence, they will be, Rebecca will be notified immediately. You need to be prepared for her reaction. I nodded, feeling a strange calm settle over me. The frantic information gathering of recent weeks had given way to clarity of purpose. I'm ready. There's one more thing to consider, Jennifer added. Our investigator found something interesting about Dr. Gardner, your marriage counselor. I looked up sharply. He's involved in this? Not directly, but there's a connection we should be aware of. His wife sits on the board of a non-profit, where Daniel Wilson gave a presentation about his Seattle development 6 months ago. It might be coincidence, but it might explain why Rebecca specifically chose him for your counseling. The web of connections kept expanding, making me question every relationship in our lives. Who else might be part of this scheme? Who could I still trust? As I drove home that evening, I made my final preparations. Following Jennifer's advice, I had secured my personal documents, passport, birth certificate, military service records, in a safe deposit box at my new bank. I had photographed valuables in our home and backed up all financial records to secure cloud storage. I had even prepared a small go bag with essentials in case the confrontation went poorly. The court would hear our emergency motions the next morning. By afternoon, Rebecca would know that her carefully constructed plan had been discovered. Everything would change. I pulled into our driveway, steeling myself for one more evening of pretense. Through the front window, I could see Rebecca moving around the kitchen, preparing dinner like any normal wife on any normal evening. The domesticity of the scene struck me as profoundly sad. This beautiful life we'd built was already gone, destroyed not by external forces, but by the calculated decisions of the person I had trusted most. As I gathered my briefcase and prepared to enter our home for what might be the last peaceful evening within those walls, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Sarah. "Mike, urgent. Rebecca just called requesting verification of liquid assets for a time-sensitive opportunity." When I asked questions, she became agitated. "I think she's accelerating the timeline. Call me." I sat in my car, staring at the message. Inside, Rebecca continued preparing dinner, unaware that her plans were unraveling. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. I sat in my car for several minutes, staring at Sarah's text message while watching Rebecca through our kitchen window. She moved with practiced ease, chopping vegetables, stirring something on the stove, utterly normal movements that now seemed like performance art. How many other moments in our marriage had been carefully staged? The thought made me dizzy. I called Sarah from the driveway, keeping my voice low. "What exactly did she ask for?" I questioned. "She wanted confirmation of your total available cash across all accounts," Sarah explained. When I asked what this was regarding, she mentioned a time-sensitive investment opportunity that required immediate liquidity. She specifically asked how quickly funds could be moved from your retirement accounts, even with early withdrawal penalties. My chest tightened. "Our emergency motions aren't being filed until tomorrow morning." "I stalled her," Sarah assured me, "told her I needed to prepare proper documentation and would call her back tomorrow. She wasn't happy, but I insisted it was protocol." "Thank you," I said, genuinely grateful. "You've saved us twice now." I ended the call and immediately phoned Jennifer. She answered on the first ring. "We need to move faster," I told her without preamble, explaining Sarah's call. "Rebecca's trying to liquidate whatever she hasn't already transferred." "I'll file the emergency motions electronically tonight," Jennifer decided. "It won't be heard until morning, but it will be in the system. If she tries anything, it will look even worse for her." "What about tonight?" I asked, watching Rebecca slide something into the oven. "What happens if she makes transfers before morning?" "Document everything. Don't confront her yet," Jennifer advised. "If she makes additional transfers tonight, it strengthens our case for criminal fraud. Right now, we're operating in a civil context, but her behavior is edging toward criminal territory." I thanked Jennifer and sat silently, considering my options. I could maintain the charade for one more night, watching Rebecca perform wifely devotion while plotting financial devastation. Or I could confront her now, potentially triggering the very actions we were trying to prevent. The moment of decision arrived when Rebecca stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Mike, everything okay? Dinner's almost ready." I took a deep breath and opened the car door. Tonight would define everything that followed. Entering our home felt surreal, the familiar scent of roasting chicken, the soft jazz playing from the kitchen speakers, the half-filled glasses of wine on the counter, all elements of the life we'd built, now hollowed out by deception. I set my briefcase down and kissed Rebecca on the cheek, an automatic gesture that suddenly felt foreign. "Smells delicious," I commented, accepting the wineglass she offered. "You're going all out tonight." Rebecca smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I thought we deserved a nice meal. We've both been working so hard lately. You with the Peterson account, me with the new marketing campaign." Her eyes met mine briefly. Plus, I was thinking maybe we could discuss that weekend at the beach house. I could really use some ocean air. The beach house she was trying to steal. I nodded, taking a long sip of wine to hide whatever expression might betray my knowledge. That sounds perfect. When were you thinking? How about this weekend? I could take Friday off, and we could have 3 full days away. Her tone was light, but something about her posture seemed tense, coiled with an energy that hadn't been there before. This weekend, I repeated. That's soon. Rebecca turned back to the stove, stirring something with unnecessary vigor. Well, spontaneity keeps things exciting, right? And honestly, I feel like we need this. The counseling is helping, but some uninterrupted time together would really accelerate our progress. The urgency in her voice confirmed what Sarah had detected. Rebecca was accelerating her timeline, though I couldn't yet tell why. Did she suspect I knew something? Had Daniel pressured her for the remaining funds? I'll check my calendar tomorrow, I responded noncommittally. The Peterson situation might need monitoring. Dinner proceeded with excruciating normalcy. Rebecca asked about my day, shared anecdotes about her co-workers, refilled our wine glasses with practiced hospitality. I answered her questions, laughed at appropriate moments, and maintained the illusion that our marriage wasn't built on quicksand. After the meal, as we cleared dishes together, Rebecca casually mentioned, "Oh, I almost forgot to tell you. I spoke with Sarah Johnson today." My hands stilled momentarily as I loaded the dishwasher. "Oh, what about?" "Nothing important, just checking on some of our investment allocations." Rebecca's voice remained even, but she didn't quite meet my eyes. "I've been thinking we might want to adjust our portfolio a bit." "Interesting timing," I remarked, keeping my tone conversational. "Any specific changes you had in mind?" She shrugged, wiping down the counter with excessive attention. "Just exploring options. With the market being so volatile lately, it might make sense to move some assets into more stable vehicles." "Like what? Bonds? Treasury notes?" I pressed gently. "Maybe. Or perhaps some private equity investments." She glanced up, her expression carefully neutral. "Daniel mentioned some interesting opportunities in Seattle real estate. Limited risk, substantial returns." There it was, the opening I'd been waiting for. I could confront her now, lay out everything I knew about her scheme with Daniel. The words hovered on my tongue, ready to shatter the fragile performance we were both maintaining. Instead, I nodded thoughtfully. Real estate can be tricky. Lots of variables, especially in commercial development. "This is very structured," Rebecca countered, a hint of defensiveness entering her voice. "Daniel has partnerships with established developers. It's not like he's doing this alone." "Still, I'd want to see detailed projections, risk assessments, the usual due diligence," I replied, watching her face carefully. "Maybe Daniel could send over the prospectus." Something flickered in Rebecca's eyes, frustration perhaps, or concern that I wasn't simply agreeing. "Of course," she said smoothly, "though these opportunities move quickly. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts." "When it comes to significant investments, I prefer data over instincts," I responded, surprised by how calm I sounded, despite the roaring in my ears. "But I'm happy to review whatever information he has." Rebecca's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'll let him know. Though speaking of moving quickly, about this weekend at the beach." The conversation shifted, back to safer ground, but the dynamic had changed. I'd pushed back, however slightly, against her financial suggestions. I'd interrupted the choreography of her plan, and her response had been telling. After we finished cleaning the kitchen, Rebecca announced she needed to make some work calls and disappeared into her home office. I sat in the living room, pretending to watch a basketball game, while straining to hear her muffled conversation through the closed door. I couldn't make out specific words, but the rhythm of her voice told its own story, urgent, insistent, occasionally rising before dropping back to hushed tones. She was speaking to Daniel, I was certain, recalibrating their plans in response. To my hesitation about both the investments and the beach house weekend, when she emerged 45 minutes later, her expression was composed, but her eyes held a determined glint I recognized from particularly challenging negotiations in her professional life. "Everything okay?" I asked casually. "Just work stuff," she replied, settling beside me on the couch. She rested her head on my shoulder, a gesture of intimacy that now felt calculated. "About this weekend, I went ahead and made a reservation at that seafood place you love in Cannon Beach for Saturday night." The presumption startled me. "Without checking if I could go?" Rebecca squeezed my arm playfully. "I took a chance. It's refundable if you can't make it, but I really think we need this, Mike. Things have been better between us lately, don't you think? The counseling is working. This could be a real turning point." The irony of her using our supposed marital healing as leverage twisted in my chest like a knife. She was manufacturing urgency, creating momentum toward getting me to the beach house this weekend. But why? What advantage would that location provide for her plan? And then it hit me. If I were at the beach house, I wouldn't be in Portland. I wouldn't be able to monitor our accounts closely or respond quickly to any financial moves. The distance would give her precious hours of advantage if she were making her final play. "I'll try to make it work," I said, injecting enough enthusiasm into my voice to sound convincing. "You're right. It would be good for us." Rebecca's body relaxed against mine, tension draining from her shoulders. "Perfect. I'll pack for both of us on Friday while you're at work. That way we can leave straight from your office." The presumption of packing for me, controlling what I would have access to during the weekend, crystallized my suspicions. This weekend trip wasn't about rekindling our marriage. It was about isolating me while she executed whatever remained of her plan. Later that night, as Rebecca slept beside me, I slipped out of bed and went downstairs to my home office. I sent a detailed email to Jennifer, documenting the evening's conversations and my suspicions about the beach house strategy. I also forwarded everything to my personal email account, ensuring the evidence would remain accessible if Rebecca somehow locked me out of our home computer. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, listening to Rebecca's even breathing, remembering all the nights we'd spent this way over 12 years. The milestones we'd celebrated, the losses we'd weathered. Together, the future we'd planned. Had it all been strategic on her part, a long-term investment finally reaching its payout phase? The thought was too painful to hold for long. Dawn found me exhausted but resolute. Today would bring the legal intervention we'd planned, the formal beginning of the end of my marriage. I showered and dressed for work as usual, careful to maintain the appearance of normalcy as Rebecca prepared breakfast. "I've been thinking about those investment opportunities you mentioned," I said casually over coffee. "Would you have time to discuss the details tonight? I'd like to understand more before making any decisions." Rebecca's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Tonight's not great, actually. I have a client dinner that might run late, but we can definitely talk this weekend at the beach." She smiled, brightly. No distractions, plenty of time to go through everything properly. The deflection confirmed my suspicions. There would be no discussion, no transparency, just further delays until she could complete whatever remained of her plan. "No problem," I replied easily. "It can wait." At the office, I kept my door closed, alternating between legitimate work and constant communication with Jennifer about our legal strategy. The emergency motions had been filed electronically the previous night, as promised, and were scheduled for review that morning. At 11:17 a.m., Jennifer called with news. "The judge granted the freeze," she announced without preamble, All joint accounts, investment portfolios, and property transfers are legally paused pending further review. Rebecca should be receiving formal notification within the hour. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by apprehension. What happens now? Now we wait for her reaction, Jennifer replied pragmatically. The notification will come from the court, not from you. My advice is to continue as if you know nothing about it. Her response will tell us a lot about how to proceed. I agreed, though the thought of continuing the charade felt increasingly unbearable. Each conversation with Rebecca now required parsing every word for hidden meanings, scrutinizing every gesture for signs of her true intentions. It was exhausting. At 12:32 p.m., my cell phone rang, Rebecca's office number. I answered with practiced casualness. Mike. Her voice was tight, controlled. Have you received any unusual legal notices today? The moment of truth had arrived sooner than expected. I could continue pretending ignorance, or I could finally acknowledge what we both knew. The weight of deception had become too heavy to carry. You mean about the asset freeze? I asked quietly. Yes, Rebecca. I know everything. Silence stretched between us, taut with unspoken accusations. When she finally spoke, her voice had transformed, harder, colder. You've made a serious mistake. Whatever you think you know, I know about the $340,000 you've transferred to Daniel, I interrupted, surprising myself with my steadiness. I know about your attempt to transfer our beach property to a trust with him as trustee. I know about his failing development project in Seattle and your plans to use our money to salvage it. Another long silence followed. I could almost hear her recalculating, reassessing. This is ridiculous, she finally said, though the conviction in her voice had wavered. I've been managing our finances as I always have. Those transfers were legitimate investments. I've read the emails, Rebecca. The words fell between us like stones. Every exchange between you and Daniel for the past 18 months, the exit plan timeline, the Seattle property projections, the post-divorce budget you created based on assets that should have been divided between us. Her sharp intake of breath confirmed everything. You went through my personal emails, my private files. The attempt to shift blame almost made me laugh. That's your response? Not denying the systematic theft of our joint assets, just angry that I discovered it? You don't understand, she said, her tone shifting to something almost pleading. Daniel's business is on the verge of something extraordinary. The returns will benefit both of us. Stop lying, I said quietly. The Seattle development is significantly overvalued. Construction costs are underestimated by nearly 40%. The projections Daniel showed you are fantasy. This isn't an investment. It's financial suicide. You had no right. I had every right, I cut in. As your husband, as co-owner of the assets you were systematically draining, as the person you were deliberately deceiving while pretending to work on our marriage. The counseling sessions, that's what I can't forgive, I continued, the words flowing now that the dam had broken. You sat across from me, watching me genuinely try to save our marriage, all while executing your exit plan. Do you have any idea how cruel that is? Rebecca's voice hardened again. You were never home. Always at the office, always prioritizing clients over our relationship. What was I supposed to do? Ask for a divorce, I replied simply, like a person with integrity. Another silence, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had changed once more, calculating, assessing the new battlefield. So what happens now? You've frozen the accounts. Congratulations, but that's temporary. Now we proceed legally, I explained, feeling oddly detached. All transfers will be reversed. Daniel will need to account for every dollar. The attempted property transfer has been invalidated, and divorce proceedings will begin with full financial disclosure required from both parties. You're making a mistake, Rebecca insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. Daniel's project will generate returns that could benefit both of us. This freeze jeopardizes everything he's worked for. His financial problems aren't my concern, I replied, nor should they have been yours, at least not to the extent of committing fraud. It wasn't fraud, she insisted. It was helping family. With stolen money, I countered. Money you had no right to transfer without my knowledge or consent. Rebecca's tone shifted again, suddenly conciliatory. Mike, please, let's discuss this in person, not over the phone like this. Maybe we can still work something out that benefits everyone. The abrupt change in tactics was jarring but not unexpected. Jennifer had warned me that when confronted, Rebecca might attempt to regain control through manipulation, using our history, appealing to my emotions. There's nothing to discuss, I said firmly. The legal process will handle everything from here. I suggest you contact an attorney. And what about this weekend? She asked, an edge of desperation entering her voice. The beach house. There will be no weekend trip, I interrupted. In fact, I won't be coming home tonight. I've arranged to stay elsewhere while this initial phase is sorted out. You're leaving our home? Rebecca's voice rose in disbelief. Where exactly do you think you're going? That's not your concern anymore, I replied quietly. Goodbye, Rebecca. I ended the call and sat motionless, absorbing the finality of what had just transpired. 12 years of marriage, concluded in a 7-minute phone conversation. The relief of honesty warred with the grief of absolute loss. My office phone rang almost immediately, Jennifer calling for an update. I recounted the conversation in detail. You handled that well, she commended me. The important thing now is to secure your personal belongings before she potentially restricts access to your home. I had the foresight to move essential documents to a safe deposit box last week, I told her, but there are still things at the house I'd prefer not to lose. I'll send someone from my office to accompany you, Jennifer decided. Having a witness present will help prevent any accusations of impropriety and might discourage confrontational behavior. 3 hours later, I found myself standing on my own front porch with Alicia, Jennifer's paralegal, beside me. I used my key to enter, calling out Rebecca's name to announce our presence. The house was silent. She must still be at work, I remarked, though I suspected she might be meeting with Daniel or consulting her own attorney. Alicia nodded professionally. Let's proceed efficiently. Focus on irreplaceable items and personal effects you'll need. Immediately. I moved through our home with strange detachment, selecting items that now seemed to belong to another life. Photo albums from my childhood, my father's watch, the hand-carved chess set my grandfather had made. Clothes went into suitcases, important papers into a document box, a few sentimental items carefully wrapped and placed in storage containers. In our bedroom, I hesitated before Rebecca's jewelry box. The diamond earrings I'd given her for our 10th anniversary were visible, symbols of a milestone we'd celebrated with genuine joy, at least on my part. The memory of her wearing them at dinner that night, candlelight reflecting in the stones and in her eyes, squeezed my heart painfully. Should I take any joint property items? I asked Alicia, who was efficiently photographing each room for documentation. Only what's clearly yours, she advised. Everything else will be addressed in the property division phase. I nodded and closed the jewelry box without touching anything. Some boundaries still mattered, even now. As I packed my home office, collecting files and the framed photo of my parents, I noticed a document on my desk that hadn't been there that morning. A printout of our most recent investment account statement. Several figures had been circled, in red pen, with handwritten calculations in the margin. Rebecca had been here, assessing what remained accessible after the freeze. The thought of her moving through our home, calculating losses and remaining assets while I confronted the demolition of our marriage, crystallized something within me. This wasn't just financial betrayal. It was the complete absence of emotional connection. I photographed the document before adding it to my files. Every piece of evidence strengthened our case, though the case itself felt increasingly hollow. What victory could there be in proving the person you loved never really existed? As Alicia and I loaded the last of my belongings into my car, the neighbor across the street waved cheerfully. "Moving some things, Mike?" she called. "Rebecca was loading her car earlier too. Said you both were finally taking that trip to Mexico you've been talking about." I forced a smile and waved back. Non-committally, another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Rebecca had been preparing her own exit, creating a cover story for her absence, while executing whatever backup plan she and Daniel had developed. Mexico wasn't on our agenda, I told Alicia as we got into the car. "She's running." Alicia immediately phoned Jennifer, relaying this new information. Before we had driven 2 blocks, Jennifer called me directly. "I'm filing additional motions immediately," she said without preamble. "If Rebecca's planning to leave the jurisdiction, we need the court to be aware. Where are you headed now?" "A hotel downtown," I replied. "Just for tonight until I figure out something more permanent." "Change of plans," Jennifer said decisively. "Come to my office first. There are developments you need to be aware of." 40 minutes later, I sat across from Jennifer in her office as she slid a folder across her desk. "Our investigator found something significant this afternoon," she explained. "Financial records from Wilson Enterprises show that Daniel has already spent a substantial portion of the transferred funds, not on the Seattle development, but on settling personal debts and making payments on an expansive property in Mexico." I stared at the documents, the implications sinking in. They never intended to invest the money in the Seattle project at all. Jennifer nodded grimly. "It appears that was largely a fiction to justify the transfers. The real plan seems to have been to move as much capital as possible beyond U.S. jurisdiction." "And the beach house weekend?" I asked, although I already suspected the answer. "Most likely to give Rebecca time to leave the country while you were isolated in Cannon." "Beach," Jennifer confirmed. "According to our investigator, Daniel purchased 3 airline tickets to Mexico City on Monday, 2 for tomorrow morning and 1 for Sunday evening." "3 tickets?" I repeated, confused. "The third appears to be for your mother-in-law," Jennifer said, watching my reaction carefully. "Patricia Wilson has been staying with Daniel in Seattle for the past 3 weeks, ostensibly helping with some health issues." The involvement of Rebecca's mother added another layer to the betrayal. This wasn't just Rebecca and Daniel. It was the wider family, coordinating to systematically dismantle my financial life. "So the entire Wilson family was in on this," I said flatly. Jennifer's expression was sympathetic but direct. "It appears so, which is why we're escalating our legal approach. This level of coordination and the attempts to move assets internationally potentially elevate this from civil fraud to criminal conspiracy." I sat back, trying to absorb the magnitude of what we'd discovered. From financial betrayal to international flight, from marital deception to family conspiracy, each revelation expanded the scope of Rebecca's actions beyond what I could have imagined. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Now," Jennifer said firmly, "we ensure they don't get away with it." Jennifer's words echoed in my mind as I left her office that evening. "We ensure they don't get away with it." The determination in her voice had been reassuring, but as I checked into the downtown Marriott, a hotel Rebecca and I had stayed in during happier times. The full weight of what lay ahead settled over me. This wasn't simply about recovering assets anymore. This was about dismantling an elaborate conspiracy involving my wife, her brother, and apparently their mother too. The scope of their deception was breathtaking, and I needed a strategy equal to the challenge. I placed my keycard on the hotel room desk and unpacked my laptop. The room felt sterile and anonymous, a fitting backdrop for this strange liminal space between the life I thought I had and whatever would come next. I ordered room service without really tasting the food, my mind racing through potential scenarios and countermoves. My phone buzzed with texts from Rebecca throughout the evening. 7:18 p.m., where are you? We need to talk about this. 7:49 p.m., you're overreacting. There's an explanation for everything if you just listen. 8:22 p.m., this asset freeze is going to damage both of us financially. You're being irrational. 9:05 p.m., at least tell me where you're staying. We can't solve this without communication. I didn't respond to any of them. Jennifer had advised against engaging directly now that the legal process was in motion. Each message seemed calculated to elicit different responses: concern, doubt, financial anxiety, guilt. Classic manipulation tactics I might not have recognized a month ago but now saw with painful clarity. At 10:17 p.m., a final message arrived. I've spoken with an attorney. You've made a serious mistake, Mike. This doesn't have to be ugly, but you're forcing my hand. The threat was thinly veiled. I forwarded the message to Jennifer, who responded. Immediately, standard intimidation tactic, ignore it. We'll meet tomorrow at 8 a.m. to finalize our comprehensive strategy. I tried to sleep, but found myself staring at the ceiling, replaying moments from my marriage through this new lens of betrayal. The weekend trips Rebecca had taken to visit her mother over the past year. Had she actually been meeting with Daniel to plan this? The late nights she'd spent working on marketing presentations, had she been constructing the architecture of our financial dismantling instead? The counseling sessions where she'd seemed so earnest about rebuilding trust, had she been suppressing? Laughter at the irony. At 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and opened my laptop. If we were going to battle tomorrow, I needed to be fully prepared. I spent the pre-dawn hours organizing everything I knew about the Wilson family's scheme, creating a detailed timeline that connected Rebecca's actions with the developments in Daniel's business and their apparent exit strategy to Mexico. The pattern was undeniable once laid out chronologically. 18 months ago, Daniel's Seattle property development faces initial funding rejection from legitimate investors. 16 months ago, Rebecca begins taking greater control of our day-to-day financial management. 14 months ago, first small transfers begin from our joint accounts. 12 months ago, Rebecca suggests updating our wills and power of attorney documents. 9 months ago, larger transfers begin, coinciding with Daniel's purchase options on the Seattle property. 6 months ago, Daniel makes presentation about his development to non-profit board, where our marriage counselor's wife serves. 3 months ago, Rebecca suggests marriage counseling, creates exit plan document. 2 months ago, Daniel makes initial payments on Mexican property. 6 weeks ago, Rebecca attempts to transfer beach house property to trust with Daniel as trustee. 3 weeks ago, Rebecca's mother moves to Seattle, ostensibly for health reasons. 1 week ago, Daniel purchases airline tickets to Mexico. Seeing it all mapped out reinforced the methodical nature of their plan. This wasn't opportunistic theft. It was a calculated long-term strategy designed to systematically extract maximum assets with minimum risk of detection. The timing of the counseling, providing both distraction for me and a narrative of marital difficulties that could later justify separate finances, was particularly insidious. By the time I arrived at Jennifer's office at 8 a.m., fueled by hotel coffee and grim determination, I had developed a comprehensive understanding of what we were facing. "You look like you haven't slept," Jennifer observed as I set my laptop on her conference table. "I've been more productive without it," I replied, opening the timeline I'd created. "I need to understand what we're up against before we decide how to respond." Jennifer scanned my work, nodding appreciatively. "This is excellent. It establishes clear intent and premeditation." She slid a folder across the table. "And it aligns perfectly with what our investigator discovered last night." I opened the folder to find printouts of flight confirmations. "They've changed their tickets," I noted, scanning the details. "Instead of tomorrow morning, they're now booked for noon today. Rebecca Daniel and Patricia Wilson flying to Mexico City," Jennifer confirmed. "Our timeline was accelerated the moment the asset freeze was implemented." "Can we stop them?" I asked. Jennifer's expression was measured. "We can try. I've already contacted the district attorney's office about the possibility of criminal charges related to financial fraud and attempted removal of disputed assets from the jurisdiction. They're reviewing our evidence now." "How quickly can they act?" "That depends on how compelling they find our case," she said honestly. "Criminal prosecution moves at its own pace, and we can't control that timeline." "So they might still get away," I said flatly. "Physically, perhaps for now," Jennifer acknowledged. "But financially, that's where we have leverage. The asset freeze remains in place regardless of their location, and international recovery of fraudulently obtained assets, while complex, is entirely possible." We spent the next hour developing a multi-pronged strategy that addressed both immediate concerns and long-term recovery. First, Jennifer would push for emergency court orders specifically prohibiting Rebecca and Daniel from leaving the jurisdiction while financial matters remained unresolved. This was a long shot given the timing, but worth pursuing. Second, we would formally notify all financial institutions about the potential for additional unauthorized attempts at accessing accounts, placing heightened security protocols on anything connected to our assets. Third, we would accelerate the divorce filing with specific provisions addressing the financial fraud, ensuring that when property division occurred, all illegally transferred assets would be factored into the calculations. Fourth, we would pursue civil claims against Daniel Wilson personally for his role in the scheme, potentially extending those claims to Patricia Wilson if evidence supported her active participation rather than mere knowledge. Finally, we would cooperate fully with any criminal investigation, providing all evidence we had gathered about the systematic nature of the fraud. "The goal," Jennifer explained, "is to create a situation where even if they physically leave the country, they can't access or utilize the assets they've taken. Eventually, the financial pressure will force engagement with the legal process." As Jennifer called the court to check on our emergency motion status, I stepped into the hallway to collect my thoughts. The strategy was sound, but something still bothered me. There was a personal element to this betrayal that legal maneuvers couldn't address. Rebecca hadn't just stolen money, she'd weaponized our marriage itself, using our counseling sessions as cover for her crimes. That calculated cruelty deserved a response beyond financial recovery. When I returned to Jennifer's office, she was just ending her call with the court clerk. "The judge will review our emergency motion to prevent departure within the hour, but given their flight timing, it's going to be close." "What are the chances the judge grants it in time?" I asked. 50-50, she admitted. "The evidence is compelling, but judges are generally reluctant to restrict freedom of movement without a criminal charge already filed." I nodded, accepting. The uncertainty. While we wait, I'd like to discuss something else, Dr. Gardner. The marriage counselor? Jennifer looked surprised. What about him? He was an unwitting part of their scheme, I explained. Rebecca deliberately chose him, possibly because of his wife's connection to Daniel's presentation. He deserves to know that his professional services were being misused as cover for fraud. Jennifer considered this. Normally, I'd advise against contacting anyone connected to the case while legal proceedings are active, but in this instance... She paused. Dr. Gardner isn't just a peripheral figure. If Rebecca selected him specifically because of his wife's connection to Daniel, that strengthens our case regarding premeditation and conspiracy. So I can speak with him, yes, but carefully. Stick to facts you personally know. Don't make accusations you can't substantiate. And remember that anything you say could potentially be repeated in court. With Jennifer's cautious blessing, I called Dr. Gardner's office from the conference room. His receptionist initially said he was with a patient, but when I explained it was an urgent matter related to my case, she put me through to his private line. Michael, he answered, his voice carrying its usual measured calm. I've been concerned since you cancelled our upcoming sessions without explanation. How are you? The sincere concern in his voice reminded me that while I had been betrayed, others had been manipulated as well. I'm calling to share some difficult information, Dr. Gardner. Information that affects you professionally. I explained as objectively as possible what we had discovered about Rebecca's use of our counseling sessions as cover for her financial scheme. I detailed the timeline, the connection to his wife's non-profit board, and Rebecca's methodical approach. Dr. Gardner remained silent as I spoke, only occasionally making small sounds of acknowledgement. When I finished, the pause that followed felt weighted with professional and personal recalibration. I appreciate you bringing this to my attention, he finally said, his voice noticeably tighter than before. In 15 years of practice, I've certainly encountered deception in the counseling context, but never as a deliberately orchestrated component of financial fraud. I wanted you to know that the failure of our counseling wasn't a reflection on your methods, I told him. Success was never Rebecca's goal. May I ask what you're hoping to achieve by sharing this information? His question wasn't accusatory, but thoughtfully direct. Two things, I replied honestly. First, professional courtesy. You deserved to know your services were misused. Second, I'm trying to understand the full scope of Rebecca's deception. If she selected you specifically because of your wife's connection to Daniel's business presentation, that suggests an even more calculated approach than we initially believed. Dr. Gardner was quiet for a moment. I can't discuss other patients, obviously, but I can tell you that Rebecca reached out to me directly rather than going through the referral process most of my clients use. She specifically mentioned my approach to trust rebuilding in relationships affected by financial disagreements. The precision of her targeting was chilling. She hadn't just chosen any counselor. She'd selected one whose specialty aligned perfectly with the cover story she needed. Thank you for your honesty, I said. It helps complete the picture. Michael, Dr. Gardner said before I could end the call, what Rebecca did represents a profound betrayal on multiple levels. As you process this, please consider speaking with someone, not necessarily me, given the circumstances, but a professional who can help navigate the psychological impact of this kind of deception. His concern touched me unexpectedly. I'll consider that, I promised. As I ended the call, Jennifer knocked on the conference room door. The district attorney's office just called. They're sending someone over to review our evidence immediately. They seem particularly interested in the international flight aspect. A surge of cautious hope rose within me. That's faster than expected. Financial fraud crossing state lines with apparent intent to leave the country elevates the priority, Jennifer explained. I've also heard from the judge reviewing our emergency motion. She wants additional documentation about the Mexican property connection before ruling. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity. Jennifer's team assembled comprehensive documentation packages for both the judge and the district attorney's representative. I added my timeline and the information from Dr. Gardner, further establishing the methodical nature of Rebecca's actions. At 11:17 a.m., Jennifer received a call from the court. She listened intently, making notes, her expression giving nothing away. When she hung up, she looked at me steadily. The judge has granted the emergency order prohibiting Rebecca, Daniel, and Patricia Wilson from leaving the jurisdiction pending resolution of the financial matters. Law enforcement has been notified to enforce the order if necessary. Relief washed through me. Their flight leaves at noon. Will the order reach them in time? Jennifer checked her watch. It's being processed electronically now. The real question is whether they're already at the airport and how quickly the order can be communicated to security there. The district attorney's representative, a serious woman named Elena Vasquez, arrived as we were discussing next steps. She reviewed our evidence with professional efficiency, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific transfers or timeline elements. This is organized and compelling, she acknowledged after nearly an hour, particularly the coordination between parties and the apparent intent to remove assets from the country. I'm prepared to recommend charges of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted removal of disputed assets from jurisdiction. How quickly can those charges be filed? I asked. I'll begin the process immediately, but formal charges typically take several days to process through the system, she explained. The emergency court order should prevent their departure in the meantime. As Elena packed up the copies of evidence she'd selected, her phone rang. She answered, listened briefly, then looked at us with new intensity. That was my colleague at the airport, she said, ending the call. Security has been alerted about the emergency order, but they're reporting that Rebecca and Daniel Wilson checked in for their flight 40 minutes ago. Patricia Wilson's reservation was cancelled this morning. My stomach tightened. They're already past security. Elena nodded. The order is being communicated to airport authorities now, but timing will be tight. They're paging the Wilsons to return to the security checkpoint. The next half hour was excruciating. Jennifer, Elena, and I remained in the conference room, waiting for updates from the airport authorities. The noon departure time came and went with no news. Finally, at 12:23 p.m., Elena's phone rang again. She answered, listening intently before thanking the caller and turning to us. The flight departed on schedule, she reported grimly. Security paged Rebecca and Daniel Wilson repeatedly, but they either didn't hear the announcements or chose to ignore them. So they're gone, I said, the words feeling hollow in my mouth. They got away. Physically, yes, for now, Elena confirmed. But here's what's interesting. According to the airline, while both Rebecca and Daniel Wilson checked in for the flight, only Daniel boarded. Rebecca's boarding pass was never scanned. The information landed like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. She didn't get on the plane. Then where is she? Jennifer and Elena exchanged glances. That, Jennifer said carefully, is now a very important question. The revelation that Rebecca hadn't boarded the flight to Mexico City transformed our strategy session. If she was still in the country, despite the carefully orchestrated escape plan, something had changed, either in her circumstances or in her strategy. We need to find her immediately, Elena stated, already dialing her office. If she's attempting to access additional assets before leaving through another route, we need to intercept her. While Elena coordinated with her team, Jennifer pulled me aside. This development suggests either a last-minute change of plans or a disagreement between Rebecca and Daniel. Either way, it creates an opportunity. What kind of opportunity? I asked. If they're no longer operating in perfect coordination, the conspiracy becomes more vulnerable, she explained. We might be able to leverage that division. Elena rejoined us after completing her calls. I've put out an alert for Rebecca Wilson through appropriate channels. Not a formal APB yet, but close. We'll also have someone check your home and known associates' addresses. There's one place I suspect. She might go, I said, an idea forming. The beach house. Jennifer looked skeptical. Why would she go there? It's the property she tried to transfer away. We've already established legal protections on it. Precisely because it's the last place we'd expect, I reasoned. It's isolated, familiar to her, and she still has keys. If she's separated from Daniel's plan, but still intends to leave the country, she might go there to regroup. Elena considered this. It's worth checking. I'll have the local police do a wellness check on the property. No, I said firmly. If she's there and sees police, she'll be gone before we can respond. Let me go. Both women looked at me with concern. That's not advisable, Jennifer began. Given the hostility, I know Rebecca better than anyone, I interrupted. If she's there, I might be able to get information about Daniel's plans, the location of additional assets, everything we need to strengthen our case. Elena and Jennifer exchanged glances again, communicating silent professional concerns. If I may, Elena said carefully, there's merit to Michael's suggestion, but with modifications. We could have law enforcement nearby, but not visible. Michael makes initial contact while wearing a recording device. This could potentially secure admissible evidence while minimizing risk. The suggestion was pragmatic, but jarring. Wearing a wire to record a conversation with my wife of 12 years. Yet another surreal element in this unraveling reality. Would you be comfortable with that approach? Jennifer asked me. I nodded slowly. If it helps build the case and recover what they've taken, yes. The plan came together quickly after that. Elena arranged for a small technical team to meet us halfway to Cannon Beach. Jennifer would follow in her car to provide legal support if needed. I would drive my own vehicle, familiar to Rebecca if she was watching the property, and approach directly. As I gathered my things to leave, Jennifer pulled me aside once more. Are you certain about this? Coming face to face with Rebecca now, with everything so raw, could be more difficult than you anticipate. I'm not certain about anything anymore, I admitted, but doing something concrete feels better than waiting for others to solve this. The drive to Cannon Beach took just under 2 hours. Normally, a peaceful journey with spectacular coastal views. Today, it felt like moving through a hostile landscape. Every familiar landmark we passed, the roadside cafe where Rebecca and I had stopped for coffee countless times, the scenic overlook where we'd watched storms roll in from the Pacific, was tainted by new knowledge. We met Elena's technical team at a state park 20 miles from our destination. The recording device they provided was smaller than I'd expected, a modified smartphone that would capture audio while appearing to be nothing more than a normal phone in my pocket. Just keep it on your person, the technician explained, showing me how to activate it. The battery will last approximately 6 hours. Try to position yourself within 10 feet of the subject for optimal audio quality. The subject, not Rebecca, not my wife. A target for surveillance, clinical, detached, reduced to her functional role in an investigation. I nodded my understanding while trying to reconcile this strange new reality. With the device secured and tested, our small convoy continued toward Cannon Beach. Elena's unmarked vehicle would park on an access road with sightlines to our property but remain out of view from the house itself. Jennifer would stay in town, close enough to reach us quickly if needed, but far enough to avoid detection. As I turned onto the private road leading to our beach house, my heart pounded against my ribs. The familiar drive felt dreamlike. The same wind-sculpted shore pines, the same glimpses of ocean between dunes. But now I was approaching as something between an investigator and an intruder. From a distance, the house looked as it always had. Cedar shingles weathered to a soft grey, large windows facing the ocean, wraparound deck where we'd spent countless evenings watching the sunset. Nothing visibly indicated whether someone was inside, but as I drew closer I noticed subtle signs. The living room curtains were drawn, unusual for a house whose primary feature was its ocean view. And parked behind the house, partially obscured by the garden shed but unmistakable, was Rebecca's silver Audi. She was here. I parked in the circular driveway, making no attempt to hide my arrival. If Rebecca was watching, I wanted her to know. It was me, alone, without obvious law enforcement presence. I switched on the recording device in my pocket, took a deep breath, and approached the front door. For a moment I considered using my key, asserting my ownership of the property, but that felt unnecessarily confrontational. Instead, I knocked. 3. Measured raps on the door of my own vacation home. Silence followed, stretching for nearly a minute. I knocked again, louder this time. "Rebecca," I called, "I know you're here. We need to talk." More silence. Then finally the sound of footsteps approaching the door. The deadbolt turned, and the door opened just enough to reveal Rebecca standing in the entryway. She looked different somehow, her usual polished appearance replaced by something more fragile. Her hair was pulled back carelessly, her face bare of makeup, her expression a complex mixture of defiance and uncertainty. "What are you doing here, Mike?" she asked, making no move to open the door further. I kept my voice level, focusing on the script Elena and I had prepared. "I think that's my question. Weren't you supposed to be on a flight to Mexico City with Daniel?" Something flickered across her face. Surprised that I knew their plans, perhaps, or something more complicated. "I decided not to go," she said simply. "Can I come in?" I asked. "This conversation would be better inside." Rebecca hesitated, then stepped back, opening the door just enough for me to enter. The interior of our beach house was exactly as I remembered it. The comfortable sectional facing the fireplace, the dining table where we'd hosted friends for seafood dinners, the kitchen where we'd cooked together on rainy weekends. The normality of the setting made the abnormality of our situation even more jarring. "Why are you here?" Rebecca asked again, crossing her arms defensively. I moved toward the seating area, positioning myself where the recording device would capture both our voices clearly. "I think we have things to discuss, don't you? Like why Daniel boarded a flight to Mexico while you stayed behind, or why your mother's reservation was canceled this morning." Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're monitoring our travel plans now?" "The court is," I corrected her. "There's an emergency order prohibiting all of you from leaving the jurisdiction while the financial investigation proceeds." "Daniel apparently ignored it." "You didn't. I'm wondering why." Rebecca moved to the window, pulling back the curtains slightly to look at the ocean. The defensive posture remained, but something in her demeanor had shifted. A resignation, perhaps, or calculation of new possibilities. "Daniel and I had a disagreement," she said finally, her back still to me, "about next steps." "What kind of disagreement?" I prompted, careful to keep my tone conversational rather than confrontational. She turned to face me, studying my expression, as if trying to decode my strategy. "He wanted to leave immediately. I thought it was premature." "Because of the asset freeze?" A small, humorless smile touched her lips. "You've been busy." "So have you," I countered. "Transferring our assets, attempting to move property into trusts, planning international relocation, 12 years of marriage, and it turns out I never really knew you at all." The accusation hung in the air between us. Rebecca moved to the couch and sat, suddenly looking tired. "You knew exactly who I was, Mike. Ambitious, strategic, forward-thinking. Those qualities were what attracted you to me in the first place." "There's a difference between ambition and fraud," I said quietly, "between strategy and betrayal." Rebecca's gaze didn't waver. "Is there? Or is it just a matter of perspective and which side of the equation you're on?" The coldness of her response chilled me. This was the real Rebecca finally emerging, calculating, unencumbered by pretense, viewing our entire relationship as simply another transaction to be optimized. "Why didn't you just ask for a divorce?" I asked, genuinely curious now. "You'd have received half of everything legally." "Half?" she repeated, as if the word itself was distasteful. "Half of what we built, with Daniel receiving nothing despite his loyalty and support throughout our marriage. That wasn't acceptable." "His loyalty? He's been bankrupt twice, Rebecca. His business ventures consistently fail. How is supporting that considered strategic?" Her expression hardened. "Family supports family, something you never quite understood with your rigid boundaries and separate holidays." The conversation was veering into old relationship territory, away from the financial evidence we needed. I redirected carefully. "So this was about helping Daniel all along? The transfers, the property manipulation, the planned move to Mexico?" Rebecca stood again, moving restlessly around the room. "It was about creating opportunity. Daniel's Seattle development will transform that neighborhood once it's complete. The returns will be exceptional." "If it's ever built," I countered. "The property is overvalued by at least 40%. Construction costs are significantly underestimated. The projections you were shown are fantasy." She waved dismissively. "You always did lack vision. That's why I had to take control of our financial future." "By committing fraud? By making necessary adjustments to benefit everyone?" she snapped, her composure finally cracking. "The Seattle project needs capital now. Our money was sitting in conservative investments, earning minimal returns. I created a solution that would benefit both our financial future and help families simultaneously." I let her words hang in the air, the recording device capturing her admission of deliberate fund redirection. Then, carefully, I asked the question, most likely to elicit useful information. "Where is the money now, Rebecca? How much has Daniel already spent?" She hesitated, clearly calculating the implications of her response. "Some has been invested in securing the Seattle property. Some has been allocated to preliminary development costs." "And the Mexican property?" I pressed. "The one purchased 2 months ago?" Her surprise was visible this time. "How did you—" "We know everything," I said simply. "The property purchases, the cancelled flight arrangements, your mother's involvement. The only questions remaining are about recovery." Rebecca's expression shifted through several emotions: shock, calculation, and finally a strange calm. She moved to the kitchen counter and poured herself a glass of water, buying time to formulate her response. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked finally. "Transparency," I replied. "Full disclosure of all transfers, all accounts, all remaining assets. Immediate return of accessible funds. Cooperation with the financial investigation. And in return, potentially reduced legal consequences. The distinction between civil fraud and criminal conspiracy hinges largely on your actions from this point forward." Rebecca sipped her water slowly, her mind visibly working through options and outcomes. "And Daniel, that depends on his cooperation as well." She set down her glass with deliberate care. "He won't cooperate. He's convinced the Seattle project will save everything if he can just keep it moving forward." "Then he'll face the consequences of that decision," I said simply. as will you, if you continue aligning with his strategy." Rebecca looked out the window toward the ocean, her profile outlined against the afternoon light. For a moment, I caught a glimpse of the woman I thought I'd married, thoughtful, strategic, weighing options with clear-eyed pragmatism. "What would cooperation look like exactly?" she asked. I had her attention. The strategic groundwork was laid. Now everything depended on what happened next. "Full cooperation means full disclosure," I told Rebecca as we sat across from each other at the beach house dining table. "Every account, every transfer, every conversation with Daniel about the plan." Rebecca's fingers tapped rhythmically against her water glass. "And the criminal charges Elena Vasquez is preparing. What happens with those?" I wasn't surprised she knew about the district attorney's involvement. Rebecca had always maintained impressive information networks. "That depends on how completely you cooperate and how much we recover." She nodded slowly, calculations visibly running behind her eyes. "Daniel won't forgive me." "That's not my concern," I replied evenly. Rebecca studied me for a long moment. "You've changed. Betrayal does that." Something flickered across her face, not quite remorse, but perhaps recognition of the magnitude of what she'd done. "I need guarantees before I share anything." "You're not in a position to demand guarantees," I reminded her. "Daniel is currently violating a court order by leaving the country. You were planning to join him with misappropriated assets. The only guarantee I can offer is that cooperation creates better outcomes than continued resistance." Rebecca stood and walked to the window, staring out at the ocean. The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of 12 years, together and the ruins of what we'd built. "There's a laptop in the bedroom," she said finally. "Password is Cannon Bluff 2025. Everything is documented there, accounts, transfers, property details. Daniel insisted on keeping records in case we ever had disagreements. Like the one that kept you from boarding that flight today." She turned to face me. "He wanted to use the remaining accessible funds to push the Seattle development forward. I wanted to secure our position financially first. Things escalated." I nodded. "Wait here." In the bedroom, our bedroom, where we'd spent countless weekends over the years, I found the laptop on the dresser. The password worked on the first try. Inside were meticulously organized folders containing everything we needed, spreadsheets tracking every transfer, copies of property documents for the Mexican purchase, email exchanges with offshore banking representatives, even recordings of conversations between Rebecca and Daniel discussing contingency plans. The scope of documentation was stunning. Not just evidence of their fraud, but a comprehensive record that could potentially recover almost everything they'd taken. I copied the entire contents to a secure cloud drive Jennifer had prepared, then brought the laptop back to the living room. Rebecca was on the phone when I returned. She ended the call quickly when she saw me. "Daniel?" I asked. She nodded. "He landed in Mexico City. He's not happy that I'm still here." "Did you tell him about our conversation?" "No." She set her phone down carefully. "I told him I was delayed but would be joining him soon. He doesn't know you're here." "Why the deception?" Rebecca's expression hardened slightly. "Because I'm making my own strategic decisions now. This situation has evolved." I studied her face, trying to read the calculation behind her words. "You're cutting him loose." She didn't deny it. "Daniel's Seattle project is doomed. I see that now. His financial judgment has always been questionable, but I believed in his vision. After reviewing the actual numbers more carefully and hearing your assessment, continued investment would be throwing good money after bad." "So this is a business decision for you," I clarified. "Cooperating with us offers better returns than continuing with Daniel's plan." Rebecca met my gaze directly. Everything in life is ultimately a business decision, Mike, even marriage. The coldness of her worldview struck me anew. This woman had shared my bed, my name, my dreams for 12 years, yet saw our entire relationship as nothing more than a financial arrangement to be optimized or discarded based on projected returns. "I've copied the files," I told her. "Eleanor and Jennifer are waiting for my signal. They'll be here within 20 minutes. Rebecca nodded, resigned to the new reality. What happens now? You make a formal statement, return what assets you can immediately control, provide testimony against Daniel, if necessary. "And us?" she asked quietly. "There is no us anymore," I replied. "That ended the moment you decided our marriage was just another asset to leverage in your financial strategy." When Elena and Jennifer arrived, the formal process began with surprising efficiency. Rebecca's statement was recorded, documents were officially transferred to evidence, and preliminary arrangements were made for asset recovery. Daniel's Mexican property would be more complicated to address, but the extensive documentation Rebecca provided created a clear path for international asset recovery. 3 hours later, we sat in Jennifer's office downtown, the initial phase of cooperation complete. Rebecca had signed voluntary dissolution of marriage papers, preliminary asset division agreements, and formal statements admitting to her role in the financial fraud. "What happens to Rebecca now?" I asked Elena as we stepped into the hallway while Jennifer finalized some paperwork. "She'll face charges," Elena said frankly, "but her cooperation significantly mitigates the severity. Most likely she'll receive probation, restitution requirements, and possibly some community service, assuming continued full cooperation and no further attempts to hide assets." "And Daniel?" "That's more complicated. He's violated a court order by leaving the jurisdiction. His actions throughout show greater culpability. We'll work with Mexican authorities to address both his location and the property purchased with fraudulent funds." I nodded, processing the information. The legal machinery would grind forward now, recovering what could be recovered, assigning appropriate consequences. But as I watched Rebecca through the office window, sitting alone at the conference table reviewing documents, I felt a hollow ache that no legal resolution could address. 12 years of shared history, a future we'd planned together, all of it revealed as an elaborate calculation on her part, a long-term investment strategy rather than a partnership built on love and trust. When the immediate legal matters were concluded, Rebecca was released to gather personal belongings from our Lake Oswego home, under supervision from Elena's colleague. I declined to be present for that process, choosing instead to return to my hotel. In my room that evening, I reviewed everything that had transpired over the past weeks. The discovery of Rebecca's betrayal, the methodical gathering of evidence, the confrontation at the beach house, the resolution that was now taking shape through legal channels, a text arrived from Jennifer, all immediate matters addressed. Rebecca has surrendered her passport and provided additional banking details. 83% of transferred assets now frozen or in recovery process. Well done today. The message should have felt like victory. Instead, it simply underscored the surreal nature of what had happened, reducing my 12-year marriage to recovery percentages and legal outcomes. I ordered room service and opened my laptop, beginning the process of rebuilding my life. New passwords for every account Rebecca had ever accessed. A search for a small apartment to rent while the divorce proceeded. Emails to close friends explaining my sudden changed circumstances without dwelling on painful details. The mechanics of dismantling a shared life were surprisingly straightforward. The emotional landscape was far more complex. 2 days later, as I was moving essential belongings into a downtown apartment, I received a call from an unfamiliar international number. Michael Taylor. Daniel's voice was instantly recognizable, though we hadn't spoken in over a year. "Daniel," I replied neutrally, "I'm surprised to hear from you." "I imagine you are." His tone held an odd mixture of anger and resignation. "I understand my sister has made certain decisions regarding your situation. If you mean she's cooperating with authorities about the financial fraud you both committed, then yes." He laughed bitterly. "Always so direct. That was one thing Rebecca complained about, your inability to appreciate the nuances of opportunity." "Is there a purpose to this call?" I asked, unpacking books onto shelves as we spoke. "Just curiosity," he replied. "I wondered if you understood yet that you never really knew my sister at all. The Rebecca you married was a carefully constructed persona designed to attract exactly your type, the steady, financially conservative man who could provide the foundation she needed." His words were clearly intended to wound, but they simply confirmed what I'd already come to understand. "If that's all, Daniel, I have unpacking to do." "She'll rebuild, you know," he continued, ignoring my dismissal. "Rebecca always does. This setback is temporary. 5 years from now, she'll have reconstructed her life completely, probably with someone wealthier, more connected than you. That's who she really is." "Goodbye, Daniel," I said, ending the call. I set down my phone and continued arranging. My new space, smaller and simpler than the home I'd shared with Rebecca, but wholly mine. Daniel's parting attempt to unsettle me had failed because he'd fundamentally misunderstood what mattered to me now. I wasn't concerned with who Rebecca might become in the future. I was focused on rebuilding my own life with new awareness and clearer boundaries. 6 months passed. The divorce was finalized with surprisingly little drama. Rebecca continued cooperating with authorities, resulting in recovery of nearly all the transferred assets. Daniel remained in Mexico, fighting extradition while his Seattle development project collapsed without the funding he'd expected. Our beach house was sold, the proceeds divided according to the divorce settlement, which heavily favored me, given the circumstances. On a crisp autumn morning, I met with Sarah Johnson, my financial advisor, for our quarterly review. Unlike the emergency meeting that had started this entire journey, this one focused on rebuilding and future planning. "The portfolio has stabilized nicely," Sarah noted, reviewing the figures. "The recovery process has been more successful than we initially projected." I nodded, studying the numbers that represented the reconstitution of my financial life. "Any word on the final offshore account?" "Still in process, but the Mexican authorities have been surprisingly cooperative. We should see those funds returned within the next quarter." After reviewing the technical details, Sarah set aside her tablet and looked at me directly. "How are you doing, Mike? Really?" The question was sincere, coming from someone who had played a crucial role in uncovering Rebecca's deception. "Better," I replied honestly. "Some days are still difficult, but I'm moving forward." Sarah nodded. "I've always believed that financial, health and personal well-being are interconnected. You can't truly have one without the other." "I've learned that trust requires verification," I said, thinking of all the blind spots I'd had in my marriage. "In finances and in relationships. A healthy perspective," Sarah agreed, "though I hope this experience hasn't made you cynical about trust entirely." I considered her words carefully. "Not cynical, just more aware that trust should be matched, with appropriate boundaries. That applies to everything from investment portfolios to personal relationships." As I left Sarah's office and walked through downtown Portland, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The betrayal had changed me, certainly, but rather than breaking me, it had revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed. Resilience, strategic thinking, the ability to rebuild from ruins. Rebecca had taught me the most painful lesson of my life, but also perhaps the most valuable. that real security comes not from what others provide or promise, but from the boundaries we establish and the awareness we bring to every relationship. I still believed in trust. I still believed in connection. But now I understood that the deepest trust isn't blind faith, but rather a continuous choice we make with open eyes, clear boundaries, and the courage to verify what matters most. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.